Hey everyone, welcome to the show. In this episode, we've got France moving to open source solutions for a bunch of stuff, and that's pretty interesting. We've got a nice new modular Linux-powered handheld PC with various plates that you can swap to change the functionality. Seems really nice and not that expensive. And we also have some big news for Linux gaming, with developers organizing to avoid duplicating work, and a bunch of stuff happening in Mesa and DXVK, plus a bunch of stuff around desktop environments, X11, Wayland, all of that jazz. And of course we also have today's sponsor, Tuxedo computers. So you all know about Tuxedo by now. They make laptops and desktops that ship with Linux out of the box. They're based in Germany, but they ship to most countries in the world. They have a big range of computers, from the smallest form factor laptops that are as affordable as can be, all the way up to giant workstations, gaming laptops and everything. You can customize the hardware inside the device, you can customize the keyboard layout, you can have your own logo engraved on the lid, some models have color options. It's just really fantastic. I only use their devices these days. Everything that you see from me or hear from me is made on an Infinity Book Pro 16 laptop that is of course from Tuxedo, and all my gaming is done on a Tuxedo Cube, which is again from them. So if you're interested, if you need a new computer and you want to support a company that actively contributes to Linux and drivers, well, as usual, the link is down in the description. So apparently France, which is the country I live in, will ditch Teams and Zoom, so Microsoft Teams and Zoom, starting 2027. In the current geopolitical context, they've decided that using a US-made platform is not the best option if you want to make sure you're as independent as can be, and so they will be replacing all video conferencing software with their own platform called Visio, which is how we call video conferencing in French most of the time. Visio is part of the French Suite Numérique, or Digital Suite, which is something we've talked about a while back. It's a replacement for stuff like Gmail, Google Drive, Slack, Teams, all of that stuff, Google Docs, Google Sheets, all of that stuff. It's mostly aimed at public organizations, public servants, institutions, of course to replace the US-made big tech-powered solutions. Visio has integrated AI meeting transcripts using a French AI startup systems. It is hosted on French servers by a subsidiary of Dassault Systèmes, and they're estimating it will save them about 1 million euros per year for each 100,000 users on the platform, which is not bad. Since we have about 4 to 5 million civil servants in France, the savings could be pretty interesting. The Visio platform has been tested for about a year with 40,000 users, so I guess it went well enough for full deployment. Of course, the goal here is to replace US-made software solutions, so France can be more independent. It is kind of sad that this is what is needed for countries to actually decide to use open source software. The goal is not to use open source, is not to build their own stuff, it's just to not depend on another country. But the end result is the same. They're using open source solutions and they're replacing them. Now they just need to replace Office suites and operating systems with something like LibreOffice or OnlyOffice and Linux instead of Windows, and I think everything will be golden. So, crowdfunding campaign for a modular Linux-powered handheld PC has reached 10 times its intended goal. The Mecha Comet is a little handheld that sort of looks like a clamshell old phone that you could fold in half, except it doesn't fold in half, and it is a Linux PC where you can replace the bottom part, the part underneath the screen, with modular plates. It uses an ARM CPU, either a 4-core or a 6-core one, both with integrated GPUs of course. It uses eMMC storage, but does support microSD and has an NVMe slot if you want to add an SSD. It has an almost 4 inches AMOLED touchscreen, a 4100 mAh battery, and all the wireless connectivity you'd want, a gyro, a headphone jack, a haptic motor, all of that stuff. By default, it seems to run their own distribution called Mechanics. It seems optimized visually for this smaller screen, but the bootloader is open source, so you're free to tweak things and replace them. As per the modules, you can hot swipe the bottom plates on the device to add a physical keyboard or a gamepad with a few buttons, a stick and a D-pad. You can add an I/O board to get more ports. I would assume they have other ideas for the future as well. The base variant with 2 gigs of RAM and 64 gigs of storage can be had for $189 pledge, and the most expensive one with 4 gigs and 64 gigs of storage is $289. Now, in their videos and demos, it does look like an old clamshell thing with the keyboard at the bottom and the screen on top, except it doesn't seem like it folds. It's basically just a big smartphone that you can use and that runs Linux and has half a screen. It looks like an interesting device. It's not that expensive. You can totally use it as a phone, because it can support a 5G adapter using the NVMe port, for example. You can have your keyboard, you can swap things for when you need to, I don't know, play some little games on emulators, or when you just need it as a regular PC that you would plug into other peripherals with the I/O ports plate. It's interesting, and it's not that expensive. I could see myself using it, not as a full desktop replacement, of course, because it's just not going to run DaVinci Resolve and the stuff I need, but it is an interesting device, and they already passed their crowdfunding goal. Of course, it is a crowdfunding campaign, so there is no guarantee that you'll actually get a device at the end of the campaign. Now, a bunch of developers working on Linux gaming decided to basically unite around a new initiative called the Open Gaming Collective. It is an organization including stuff like Bazzite, Universal Blue, Asus Linux, Chimera OS, Nobara, Playtron, and a bunch of others. And their goal is to try and avoid duplicating the work that they do on kernel patches, on supporting various input devices for games, on adding various packages that are used for Linux gaming. They want to centralize efforts on drivers, on game scope, and all of that stuff. So you could still have options and choices as a user in terms of distros, but each distro could just focus on the actual experience and interface and toolset that they want to provide, instead of focusing on redoing the exact same background patching work and packaging work that's just being redone currently on every single gaming distro. For example, the Open Gaming Collective would produce an OGC kernel that members of the collective could all rely upon and could pull efforts on. They will apparently center on using Input Plumber to handle input devices, so all the work can go on that solution. They're also apparently working on an overlay to handle the things that SteamUI doesn't support on its own, because most of these distros just use the Steam full screen mode as their basis for the gaming experience. Some of those things seem to be worked on by Bazzite, but they are announced alongside the Open Gaming Collective, so I would assume these are the standardized things that people are going to be using, at least the members of this collective. And I think that's good. It is cool to have choice in terms of gaming distros, because some of them are more tailored toward general gaming PCs, some of them have gaming optimizations, but they are more meant for workstations on which you can game, some of them are designed for handheld, some of them are immutable, some of them aren't, so they all have their own use case. But they are also duplicating a lot of work on patching the Linux kernel for gaming performance, on bringing game scope, on packaging multiple gaming tools, and that work could just be centralized, and everyone could then just use that central work to just add the few things that makes them different from the others, instead of everyone rebuilding the same thing over and over. So I think it's a good initiative, and it might just help push Linux gaming a little bit forward again. The Linux kernel now has a contingency plan in the event the current Git repo for the kernel would be inaccessible for the project's contributors. Currently, of course, that code is hosted on Linus Torvalds' own Git repo at torvalds/linux. But if Torvalds ever were to be unable to access that repo, if it was deleted, if something happened that created a rift between Torvalds and the community, maybe if he just decided to retire, if something horrendous happened, well, the project sort of needs a plan to keep the development going. Hopefully, it won't need to be enacted, that plan, but it's still better to have one. So that plan is basically to make sure that the current organizer, this being a variable that they use to represent the last Maintainer Summit organizer or the current Linux Foundation Technical Advisory Board chair, so the most important person in the Linux kernel at any given moment, that current organizer would set up a meeting with all invitees of the latest Maintainer Summit, so all prominent kernel developers, and that meeting would decide on options for replacing Torvalds, managing a centralized repo that would take over, and they would have only 2 weeks to find that person, find that plan, and communicate the end result to the community. The Linux Foundation is also expected to help and support that plan. And it's good to have a plan in place because you never know. No one is getting any younger. People can decide to just retire, stop. We know that sometimes there are rifts in the community that make people slam the door or decide to delete everything or decide to block something. So it is important to have those contingency plans. It is more reassuring for everyone to know that if something happens, there's something planned to take over. So I hope Torvalds won't leave us anytime soon. He's been doing a really good job on managing that kernel over like a lot of years now, and so if he can keep doing it and if he wants to keep doing it, that's great. But if at some point he doesn't want to or he's unable to, we need to have someone in place to replace him, and that plan does just that. Now, XFCE is entering the Wayland era too now, with a new compositor being developed. It's called XFWL4, presumably for XFCE Wayland 4, and it's a Rust-based compositor that is being funded by using the community's donations to XFCE. The goal is to have feature parity between X11, well, XFCE on X11 and XFCE on Wayland, with the same behavior and the same functionality. That new project doesn't reuse any code from the previous XFWM4, which was the XFCE window manager used on X11, but they are using parts of the Smith-A compositor to get up and running faster. Now, the choice for Smith-A is apparently motivated by the fact that it supports all the official Wayland protocols, plus the experimental KDE protocols and the experimental WL roots protocol. So it is a little bit more advanced than just supporting the official stable protocols. It already supports the stuff that is being tested. Also, Smith-A allows for more customization than other options, and it is Rust-based, so it's memory-safe code, and the developer in charge of that project seems to prefer Rust anyway. They will of course implement X-Wayland support, the XDG protocols, but they will apparently have to do a lot of work around the window manager itself. For example, revamping the entire continuous integration system, revamping the session startup scripts for XFCE as well, because on Wayland the compositor is the root of the entire session. That's not the case on X11, so you have to rewrite your scripts to handle that. Now, work has already started on that compositor. With that work, XFCE will be fully Wayland compatible and thus will be fully future-proof if at some point X11 gets ditched by most major libraries and frameworks and everything else. So it's good to have it. They already had some kind of compatibility layer that they were working on, as far as I can remember, that translated some Wayland stuff into some X11 stuff, but this is probably just way more future-proof to have a direct native Wayland implementation. And as Plasma is also moving to Wayland only with version 6.8 in early 2027, of course, someone decided to build a version of Plasma that is X11 only and not made for Wayland. This effort was called KDE Lite before, it was renamed to SonicDE, and it is a fork of the current version of KDE Plasma, but for X11. They specifically forked KWin's X11 codebase into Sonic Win, which is their window manager and compositor. They also forked the display manager, SDDM, and they forked the Plasma workspace, which will move to be Wayland only as well in the future, so they do need to make sure that it still supports X11 for their project. Their work currently focuses on removing stuff that is Wayland only, but they're also trying to improve X11 support on KDE as well, specifically with a Vulkan backend for the window manager, which should guarantee better performance. It is early days, but it is based on existing Plasma X11 code, because Plasma currently supports X11 right now, so I wouldn't expect the SonicDE to be particularly buggy or broken, unless of course their Wayland pruning efforts removed something important that they shouldn't have. The code is on GitHub, packages exist in the AUR because, of course, packages are already in the AUR, and of course the goal is very likely to get this thing packaged for most major distros. And I say, why not? Some people will never want to move to Wayland. Some people need a specific use case on X11 or just prefer X11, and if we want those people to keep using Linux, we have to provide them with desktop environment options. Doesn't really hurt anyone to have a fork of KDE that only sticks to X11 if someone is ready to maintain it. I do understand why desktops want to ditch X11. It is a completely insecure display server. It doesn't support modern features like variable refresh rate, per display fractional scaling, HDR and that stuff. It is extremely difficult to update it to add that because the code is a giant mess, at least according to everyone who's ever worked on that code base. So it is logical that major desktops would not want to waste time maintaining a dual code base. But also, some things that X11 does will never really happen on Wayland, and so there are some use cases that still require X11. There are some people who prefer using it, and at that point, well, it's better if they have a choice of desktop. So SonicDE probably won't use it. I'm very happy on Wayland, but it is nice to have the choice for people who need it. Still on desktop environments, we have some updates about Cosmic. The Cosmic developers shared a few images of what their background blur will look like. It's what they call frosted glass. It is basically translucency plus background blur. It looks like what Windows Vista used to have on window borders and certain UI elements. It is apparently coming to Cosmic Epoch 2, which will be the next major version of the desktop. I would presume it will release with Pop! OS 26.04 later this year, but we'll see. It is apparently not Gaussian blur, it is an approximation that is less resource intensive, so enabling this optional look feature won't kill your performance. You will apparently also have control over the intensity of the blur, the amount of translucency, all of that, so you can keep things legible, and of course you can disable this if you don't like it. I've always been on the fence about translucency and blur. On the one hand, they do look pretty cool, and I know a lot of people really want those kinds of features and this kind of visual tweak. It is fancy and elegant, but on the other hand, it just wastes resources for not much of a result, and also it can really ruin legibility if it is not tweaked correctly. As usual, the Cosmic approach of letting you disable it or enable it and tweak the translucency and the blur makes it that everyone can find their sweet spot for that stuff, either not using it or configuring how they want to use it, so I guess it's good. Now we have some good news for Wine and Windows app support on Linux as well, because Bottles, which you might know, it's an application that lets you create wine prefixes or run certain wine tricks in there and install applications, well, they're trying to help identify the issues with wine compatibilities for Windows software. They added a new feature called Eagle. This is a new analysis tool that you can use to inspect Windows executables. It tries to examine how the EXE or MSI file is built, what it requires to run, the various frameworks it depends on, what stuff it bundles, and it tries to look at what could be an issue running this with Wine or Proton. So it's a deep scan of the executable done in a sandbox. They just unpack the EXE or MSI file, but in a sandbox, so it's not contaminating your PC. They check the DLLs that are being shipped with the file. They identify the runtimes like .NET, Electron, or whatever else. They identify the graphics API that is being used, Vulkan, DirectX, and Eagle can then display a list of all of these properties for the user to view, and also recommendations to the user for increased chances of being able to run that specific file. For example, specifying a Proton or Wine version that should run best, and also why you should probably rely on this one. It's very interesting stuff, not only for users, because as a user you just drop your EXE or MSI file and it's going to tell you, hey, we think you're gonna need these and these and these wine tricks to install the .NET framework and whatever else. You probably will need to replace this DLL and you should use a Wine version 9 point something. That's good. But also for developers, it's interesting because you can now identify potential compatibility problems faster and thus resolve them, and maybe also find where things are going wrong in Wine's implementations of Windows DLLs and thus fix them and improve compatibility faster. Because Eagle can tell you, hey, this will work with Wine, and then it doesn't, so you know where to look to try and fix the thing in the code. I think it's a really good effort on their part. Now, as per Linux Gaming, first, Nvidia now has an official GeForce Now client for Linux. Previously, they only had a version for the Steam Deck. It would just not run on regular Linux computers. At least I don't think anyone found a way to bypass the Steam Deck detection that they implemented. Now there's a beta for a version that runs on all Linux PCs. It is distributed as a Flatpak, so you can run it everywhere. You will have to install Flatpak, for example, on Ubuntu, but it is going to run on any distro. It is the full client as well. It has all the features you would expect, all the bells and whistles. It supports up to 5K game streaming with 120 FPS or up to 360 FPS at 1080p. It's the same business model as on Windows, so you need to own the game on an existing platform like Xbox, Steam, or Epic. You connect these accounts to NVIDIA GeForce Now, and they're going to check if they can run that game on their streaming service. And if you own it, if you pay your subscription, or I think maybe they have a free tier, and also if the game is supported on their platform, then you'll be able to play it. And provided you have a solid enough network connection, this could be the final push needed to move out from Windows and into Linux gaming. If you're stuck not being able to play that one game because of anti-cheat and that is keeping you on Windows, but you could just stream the game, then now you can do it on Linux, provided your game is supported in GeForce Now and you want to pay an extra subscription and you're okay with a little bit more latency. It's not a perfect solution, but it does fix a lot of gaps in the Linux gaming offerings. So I think it's a great thing. I personally would just not use it. If the game doesn't run on Linux, I just don't play it at all. I don't care. But for a lot of people, that's not how they approach things. The OS is a commodity, not a necessity. And so at that point, GeForce Now can help. Now, we also talked a few weeks ago about the new Nexus Mods Manager being cancelled, thus also abandoning Linux support. Well, it looks like the Nexus Mods team listened to users who complained about that, and they will bring the current Vortex Mod Manager to Linux and to SteamOS. Now, they will be targeting the Steam Deck and Steam Machine specifically, which means it can run on Linux, but they won't offer any support, and you'll have to find a package yourself for the distro you run, and if it doesn't work properly, you're gonna have to find tricks to fix that. They are not going to support it for you. But they have a bunch of stuff already implemented in there. They support, of course, Linux, the Linux version of Steam, and also Proton. They can detect the games you installed through Proton. Also, if the Steam is installed from Flatpak or Snap or any other install methods, it should work. The mod manager can detect Proton, they can find the right Proton version being used, it can automatically start games with the mods applied and enabled, it can let users run EXEs in the game's prefix as well, which is important because if not, you're just going to install it anywhere and the game won't have access to it. Basically, they did all the usual tooling that is necessary to replace the path the game would have on Windows with the path that the game has on Linux, which is inside of a Proton prefix in a Steam apps directory. So it is a bit of work. It is very interesting that they added support for that. It's cool. It means we're finally going to have a unified mod manager on Linux. We already had plenty of mod managers for specific games. You could also, using Windtricks and a bunch of stuff, install an EXE mod inside of a Proton games prefix, but this is going to make things a lot easier, so hopefully they stick with it, hopefully it supports most games using Proton, and hopefully they extend it to games that aren't on Steam, because there are some that exist. And to conclude, there's also new Vulkan extensions being merged into Mesa 26.1, which should fix a lot of the frame timing problems that we have on Linux, a bunch of the game stuttering. This is adding support for the Vulkan extension called Present Timing, and it is there to prevent timing issues. It's being worked on by Valve developers, but also people from other avenues, and it supports Wayland and X11. It's already ready to be used in the Intel drivers, AMD drivers, and the NVK driver, although the official NVIDIA drivers obviously will have to add support because they don't rely on Mesa. The way it works is that it basically lets Vulkan applications get information on how the display is being used, the timing informations, and so the application or the game can display its frames at the right time instead of presenting them too soon, which could result in bad frame timings and bad frame rates and stuttering. So it is yet another nice thing that we get to have for free for Linux gaming, which at that point, we could already match Windows' frame rate, sometimes even exceed it in a lot of titles, but we did lag behind in terms of the frame rate stability. The frame times were sometimes all over the place depending on the game or the engine. If this can fix that, then at that point Linux gaming just gets purely better than on Windows for a lot of titles, and that's good. We're not just offering a replacement that does sometimes just as well, we're offering something that is actually better in terms of the performance, which is good, I think. Anyway, this will conclude today's episode. I'll just take a second to remind you that if you want to support the show, there are plenty of links down in the description. You can also just click all the YouTube buttons and leave a comment. You know why that is important. But if you become a Patreon member or a YouTube member, you get a daily version of this show, so you don't have to wait for the end of the week to get all of these news. So check that out if you're interested. It's cheap and people who subscribe seem to kind of like it. Anyway, thank you all for listening, and I guess you'll hear me in the next one next week. Bye!